So you've decided you want to start making games, but whilst it may be very tempting to start with an open world survival crafting game or with a 4x deep strategy game or god forbid even an MMO, I'm here to tell you that please don't do that, because there's going to be a lot of problems with it. The main problem is that, look, we have to be honest with ourselves, you're kind of a bad game developer right now. How could you be a good one? You've never made a game before. And because of that, you know, technically you can make anything. Theoretically, given infinite time and money and resources or whatever, yeah, you can make games. And you can make an open world survival crafting game. But the reality is that you're probably going to burn out well before you're actually going to ever ship those games, should you go for those open world survival games or these other giant scoped games for your first few games. These are just genres that, you know, AAA developers need an entire team and multiple years to work on this. What makes you think that you, small indie developer, can do that, especially when you have no experience? Instead, I want to talk about like 3 of the main genres that I would suggest now in like 2025, basically, that I would give myself as advice of like, hey, Marnix, go and make these games instead. Do not start with an automation game, because that's what we did. A horrible genre as your first game, let me tell you that already. And walk you through why I think they're good, and then talk a little bit more about just, you know, what are some good genres, what are some bad genres, and what should you keep in mind should you not like any of the genres that I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, I do have to preface this as well that, look, these are going to be simpler genres. I'm not going to tell you to just, oh, make another 2D platform, because I know those definitely won't perform well. Your first games won't make you a millionaire. I think if you're going into game development because you saw like some game Balatro or whatever make $1 million trillion or whatever, and you're like, I'm gonna do that same thing now, I have bad news for you. Do not go into game dev purely for the money. Like, these genres, they're gonna be stepping stones, and maybe they're gonna make you $1,000 or maybe a little bit more, or most likely like $50, $100, whatever. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to build up games, to build up experience, and to ship things, to then later on, maybe 4 or 5 games down the line, actually start thinking more about like the big commercial successes, where you go and you do super deep market research and all of that. Now, don't make match 3 games, don't make 2D platforms, because I can tell you now, whether you have half a year of experience, 4 years of experience, or 20 years of experience, you're not going to be making a successful 2D platformer this year anymore. But I think an important lesson that a lot of game developers also refuse to accept, even though it's true, whenever I do videos like this where I talk about, you know, hey guys, make small games, is that you need to focus less on like the raw content that's inside of your game, and you should focus more on the niche and the hook. That's kind of what I always want to say with these things as well. If you make a small game, yeah, you can do it, and it's actually better for you as a small developer to focus on those things, because you just can't compete on a pure gameplay content and feature content and all of that compared to games like a Factorio or whatever. That's kind of the problem we had as well when we made Forge Industry, our first game, which was an automation game. The question you will always get is like, well, do you have more than Factorio? And the answer to that is no, but we were different than Factorio. And I think that is an important thing, where you do not need to do more. You just need to be better, and you can do that by having a more specific niche, focusing on one single mechanic that has been kind of underrepresented, and then having a very clear, good hook about it. And then maybe, yeah, we don't have as much content as a Factorio, for example, but we do have stuff that they don't have. And that is kind of the whole thing that I want to talk about with these genres as well, where it's more of a focus on do something different than do something better, because most likely you can't do anything better. Now, with that out of the way, first genre that I want to talk about is horror games. Probably saw this coming from a mile away. I think horror games are right now one of the best beginner-friendly games. And you may be like, oh, but I don't like horror games. I think, first of all, I used to say that as well. You just haven't tried making horror games. I think horror games can be very fun. And some of the good things about horror games, and why they're especially a good fit if these are like your first few games, is that the quality level that is required for a good horror game is just so much lower. What this basically means is you can make a 10 to 15 minute horror game, and you can put it on platforms like itch.io, and you'll get people to play it. It's something that there's not a lot of genres basically where you can have this little amount of content basically, but just focus on having a fun experience, which is what your job is gonna be as a game developer at the end of the day. It's not about how pretty your code is, it's about how fun or how memorable the gameplay experience was. You put it on there, and you can basically crank out like that first release a little bit faster, because you don't have to worry about like, oh, I need 10 hours of content. No, you need 10 minutes of content. And that's probably something you can do. And the benefit of this is that like, even if you're like, oh, I hate horror, you know, making a 10-minute horror game, it will make you realize, do I actually hate horror, or do I just hate the thought of making horror because I'm gonna be one of those other slop developers or whatever. That's kind of the thing that we had for a long time as well. And like, I get scared easily. So I'm like, oh, should I even make horror games? I think the answer to that is yes. Horror is a very forgiving genre as well. And in terms of just raw mechanical depth that you need for these things, it's also way more limited. You can usually get away with just a simple FPS controller, maybe a few like puzzles or whatever, and then the rest of it is kind of just vibes. It's just level design, it's sound design, it's finding some scary enemies, giving them some pathfinding or whatever to chase you, and that's it basically. Also, in terms of making these games look visually interesting and good, you're also pretty well off because both like very, very lo-fi PS1, PSX era graphics are pretty popular, and you can also just use realistic packs, and both of these work really well for making horror games. Now, I would say do not go for like stylized horror, that's the one thing. I think if you go for like very low poly PSX, which you can find hundreds of asset packs for on itch.io, or you go for more realistic ones, which you can find a lot of asset packs for if you want to use something like an Unreal Engine, for example. Both of these are very easy to find, allows you to just get started very quickly, because I think that's an important thing as well. Horror games, it's very easy to have that base version of the game that just has like vibes, like I said, and keep working on that. When we made our first horror game, Overtime Anomaly, we basically just had a level, we had like an ambient soundtrack, and that was it. We didn't actually have any enemies and anomalies implemented yet, but the environment was just so oppressive, and like you were already psyching yourself out as the player. And that's when we realized, okay, this is actually kind of fun, because we then could just add on like one by one extra mechanics, and there wasn't like a super complex overarching piece of code base we had to worry about. It was just add more stuff until we were happy with the game we were at, and then release it. I think one thing about the horror games, but I've mentioned this with like, you know, you're not gonna be a millionaire, is that I think horror games are relatively safe, but I think they're also kind of hard to like get that exploding virality. You know about games like Buckshot Roulette and Side Effect and Kiosk and whatever probably, but these are very much, you know, the exceptions. Like, there is so much horror games that are being released that are objectively like decent, good games, but they will be much lower in that band of like potential earnings revenue. But like I said, the goal of these first games honestly isn't to earn a lot of money. If whatever you can earn is an extra, but it's more about learning, can I ship something start to finish? Now, next up, I get a genre that some people don't see this as game development, in which case, get off your high horse, buddy. That's visual novels. On this channel, we don't really talk about visual novels that much. And the reason for that is that I do not have an artistic bone in my body, basically, but visual novels are still probably one of the easier genres to get into if you just want to, you know, dip your toes into game development. And I think something that a lot of people, because when they have a very programmer-heavy audience, also forget is that games are an art form. It's a way of creative expression, and doing things like narrative writing and art for like your story and all of that are two very valid ways of art as well. Not every artist is a cracked programmer, and God forbid, I haven't seen many programmers that are good artists either. That's fine. I think visual novels, yeah, if you're a good programmer and a horrible artist, not a genre for you, but if you have a story that you want to tell, visual novels are a very, very easy way to have an interactive medium, basically, to tell that story. There are engines like RenPy that basically you don't even have to code a lot. You just need to write, you just need to make sure of the art, and yeah, do like a little bit of like code, but it's very limited and very easy to find tutorials for all of that. Do not go for an engine like Unity or whatever if you want to make a visual novel. Once again, here the same rules apply as well. If this is the first time you're making a game or doing anything narrative to begin with, do not go and set out to make a 20-hour plus campaign or whatever, like super deep story, because you don't have the skills for that. Focus on making shorter scoped visual novel games. Those exist as well, by the way. And yeah, sure, once again, you can't charge a shit ton of money for those, but it is still getting those releases under your belt, and it can help you kickstart your game development career otherwise. There are other game dev YouTubers who did that basically. Started with a visual novel and then from then built up their audience and snowballed into making more games and getting better at game development in general. And then a final genre that I think is kind of a recent one in my zeitgeist is incremental games. This was something that honestly just a few months ago I wouldn't have thought about, but I think now more and more, I think as a good beginner project, you have those like small incremental games. Think about games like, you know, Cookie Clicker. That's like the OG basically, where it is just a simple number go up simulator, but there is just something so rewarding about it that people keep playing it. And I think especially right now on Steam, we're seeing a bit of a wave where incremental games are getting a bit more steam. I don't know if this is pun intended. And it's actually a genre that I have been experimenting a little bit with as well for the last week. And it made me realize just how good of a genre it is, because mechanically, it's nothing super complex. Can you make number go up? Then you can probably make a game somewhat. Like, the game design, whilst there is definitely a decent amount of game design that you want on it, it's nothing super deep. It's not like you're going to also have to write a shit ton of lore. It's also not visually super complicated. Usually it's just more like pixel arty, lo-fi 2D graphics and all of that. And you focus more on just making the big number get even bigger. You focus also on a lot of things that are very important for game design, like game feel, making sure that, you know, just a single button click for your incremental game feels good. And all of that, I think it's a very well-rounded game that also has that benefit of being very replayability focused as well, through things like a prestige system or an infinite mode and all of that. And I think it's a surprisingly fun genre to work on as well. So don't sleep on this, I would say. I think if you have a cool idea, going back to that previous point of niche and hook, you can make this work. And it's a relatively small scoped game. It is something that you can very easily just get the base version working on, and then just keep adding like more and more small side mechanics to it. I think it's a pretty timeless game as well. There seems to be a extremely high demand on it. Like, I know of a bunch of developers at this point that got very, very good traction by just having an itch.io build and then sharing that through the incremental game subreddit. And from there on, basically kickstarting their game dev career. On the outside, it may seem like a very simple game, or like, oh, but I just click a button. There's a bit more thought that needs to get into it, but I think it's also a genre that does challenge you at that perfect level of not really being complicated, but also not being super easy to make, where you're not really learning anything about it. Those are the three main genres. But maybe you're like, now, but hey Marnix, what about survivor likes? Weren't they like all the hype last year and like very easy to make because you just have like waves of enemies spawning and then you manage your upgrades? And yes, if I would have made this video a year ago, probably I would have told you to make a survivor-like. But this is kind of the thing with those curves as well, and why I think incremental games kind of bumped up survivor-likes right now, is that we're nearing the end of the genre boom for survivor-likes. I think at this point, most survivor-likes have been made already. Any stupid niche you can imagine has been filled in terms of survivor likes at this point. And the market has just started moving on a little bit. That's kind of what we saw as well with Kyoto Anomaly and horror games. That's maybe something. I don't think you should go for an anomaly horror game right now, because once again, we're just at the end, at the bottom tail end of that curve where interest just isn't as high in it anymore. We saw this with Kyoto Anomaly, like I said, where we made an anomaly game, and it's a really solid anomaly game. It has a good hook, I would say. It has good visuals. It has good production quality, but it just came at a point where we had multiple like pieces of feedback that were just like, but why now? You missed the Exit A train by like over a year at this point. And I think that's the problem you have as well now. Should you want to go with the survivor likes? By all means, you can go ahead and make a survivor-like, but I think it's going to be more uphill, trying to still do something different, trying to still get people interested in all of it, compared to the other games. I think horror and visual novels are very evergreen genres as well, because there's so many ways you can make a horror game. There's so many ways you can make a visual novel, because it's also more story-based and feelings-based. Whereas a survivor-like, it's more purely on that game loop, and every single iteration of that game loop has been done, I think, at this point, that it becomes harder for you, the developer, to do something different that is not just like incredible scope creep, basically. So should you want to make a survivor-like, don't let me stop you, but I think if any of the other genres on this list sound interesting to you, then go for those as well. And it doesn't even have to be on this list at the end of the day. One of my favorite things is what I call the Yoink Twist, which is, okay, what is a game that had recent like popular success or whatever? You know those games that you look at on Steam and you're like, I could have made this. What do you mean this made like $1 million or whatever? You know, those simulator games is like another like very popular one that I look at and I'm like, my dude, you have a 40% positive rating and it looks like a toddler made this. Why don't I make this myself? And I think to that certain degree, yeah, go and try to make things yourself as well. I'm not here as the all-knowing power of only make horror games or only make visual novels. That's not for everyone. I know that. Maybe you have a very good understanding of how strategy games work. Maybe you have an idea of a smaller scope strategy games because you just played like 50 different ones of them. In that case, yes, your personal experience can trump over the best beginner-friendly thing because you already have kind of a benefit going in. Mainly you know the game design already. If you can then look at it and be like, okay, I think mechanically this is still feasible. I can do this in like 6 months or whatever, or less ideally, then by all means go for it. But I think if you have no idea of like what to do and you're looking more from this video of like, oh, I want beginner projects, try out the games that I mentioned before. But at the end of the day, also know that I'm just some dude on the internet. We've released 5 games at this point. I feel like we're getting a better vibe of what does work, what doesn't work. We've canceled like another 5+ games at this point. So take that as you want. Just remember that, especially if you're an indie, focus on doing something different than doing something better. I think that's what a lot of indie developers forget. Most likely, you're not going to be able to do better, especially if it's in your first few games. So focus on doing something different instead. Anyways, I hope that was interesting. Did I miss any other like beginner-friendly genres that you're working on right now that have a shred of hope? Like I said, don't make a 2D platformer or a match 3 game or whatever. Do let me know. I'm always interested to see like what did I miss, what are you working on right now? So leave a comment about that down below. Apart from that, if you're new here, we make game development videos every week where we just talk about our experience and the things that we learned along the way. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to head down below and subscribe, because it's a win-win for both of us. You'll be notified whenever these videos come out. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!